I guess I could start by saying good afternoon. To speak in an auspice like this, again, reminds me of a part of my childhood. But a part of my childhood which I felt when I entered institutions such as this, I felt lost, completely lost. I sat in the pew, I listened, I sang, because everybody else was singing and they call out the number to sing. Most of the time I couldn't follow the notes anyhow. And then I would look and see who wrote this song. And it was always somebody from Germany or from England, Ireland, Scotland or something. And I always wondered, can anybody looking like me write? And can anyone have their songs sung on Sundays? I never could find out why for quite a long time. I find myself, as I got older, feeling much lonelier. Because when they pass along the track, in my days they used to call it track, I don't know if they call it that now, little pictures for the little kids, they would give us, to make us nice kids if we followed the little track. But I knew I wasn't going to be nice because I wasn't on any of those tracks. I looked for me. I was looking for one of my cousins who had made it as an angel. And you know, to be angelic was the thing that they were always saying in church. You know, you have to be, especially if you die suddenly as a little kid, you want to be one of the little angels. But I realized that I wasn't going to be much of an angel because I hadn't seen none looking like me. I looked very well, so I know there weren't any like me. And I said, well, why should I try to go to heaven when they ain't going to be, I can't even get to be an angel. But I figured maybe if I grew up, came a man, by that time, there'd probably be some angels looking like me. And then I went down the list of angels, Michael and all those fellows, and I said, I kept looking and turning the page, and instead of getting a little browner, they got lighter and lighter until the angels got blonde. And I said, you mean I'm not going to get a chance either? And so as I became a man and backslid, in my days they call it, you backslid from the church and so forth, I backslid and still didn't see something outside the church, no inside the church. And that probably caused me to do some investigation. You see, I had seen somewhere, and I can't remember where, but I saw somewhere where Jesus was sent, or was carried by his mother and the advice of good counsel to take him into the land of Egypt. It seems as if somebody named Herod was looking for him and was going to do him in, and the mother thought it was best to go into the land of Egypt. So I did some research of the land of Egypt 1990 years ago. And I found that the land of Egypt, you see, I had to look carefully, was located in Africa. In my youth, no one told me the land of Egypt was in Africa. To the contrary, I didn't believe it could possibly be in Africa because all the pictures I had seen, especially Tarzan, I knew what was in Africa. They had spears, and some of them who had clothes was just a little thing like what most of the ladies are wearing in Harlem now, practically nothing. So I realized that it would be easy to run down the situation. But I looked again and examined all of the records. I felt that church records would help me locate Jesus in Africa. And I didn't find a single piece of church literature mentioning the word Africa. I found a number of them mentioning Egypt, but when they showed the Egyptians, again, I couldn't find myself. And then I found some literature mentioning Ethiopia, Now I knew I felt good, because at least that was not on the coast of the Mediterranean. It's further south, as we said, more down home. And I felt happy when I saw it. But then I noticed that all the Ethiopians also looked like people from France, and I don't mean visitors to France, I mean native Frenchmen and Romans and Greeks and others. And I said, even here, I can't find me. And I thought, well, okay. I had read someplace about bronze, and somebody being bronze and had nappy hair like wool, like lambs and so forth. So I thought that has some kind of a resemblance in a roundabout way, like me. And I felt a little hopeful. So I continued to read again and disappeared at the Nicene Conference. So I made, by the time I started to write for myself and to try to show other folks who we are, I thought it was best to go back again and do some examination on historical biblical figures. And one came in mind particularly, and that would be Jesus. In this scope of affair, I had become aware of maps. And in particular, the map of Africa, being an African myself, like all of you, or if not most of you. And in my search, I questioned if Mary and Joseph were sent to hide little Jesus in Africa among his people. And the Roman soldiers had come, all of them that they could muster, of course, like Bush trying to muster all kind of soldiers to go to somebody else's land over there. I said, well, if they're mustering Roman soldiers to come into Africa, understanding that Egypt is in Africa now, according to my map, I expected to see Europeans coming in with fixed bayonets and whatnot to catch this little black-skinned boy. Well, I have to picture that in my mind. If you heard that somebody was going to hide a little boy in Harlem, by virtue of what he looked, you would know automatically that that's a little black child. Because they're going to hide him in Harlem, and he's supposed to be able to be camouflaged by virtue of the amount of people in there. You're not going to expect to go hide a little blonde little boy in Harlem, and nobody will ever see him and detect him. It wouldn't be logical thinking, would it? So when I heard that Mary and Joseph was going to hide their little son in Egypt, in Africa, I knew I had found the answer. Just like you would understand that I had found the answer. But then I went to churches in Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and all those places, and look up on the wall, and I knew I would see the person that I had become familiar with. And then I look up everywhere. I went to all the churches and looked and can't find Jesus. There were a lot of pictures, of course. Pictures with stars around the head, stabs, knives plunged in the side, all kind of things, crosses, stations, and still couldn't find Jesus. So I asked everywhere I go, what happened to Jesus? No pictures of Jesus here? And everybody said, yeah. What do you mean you just come out of you didn't see one? I said, no, I looked and looked, and I didn't see, not even his cousin. I didn't see anybody. So they said, go back and look. I went back, I looked, still no Jesus. So one brother came in and said, there. I said, the meaning the Roman fellow there? And they said, no, that's Jesus. I said, when? What happened to him? I mean, who did what? Who gave him an injection or something? And I kept looking hard. I knew that, the done in my Jesus again. So finally somebody said, well, that's not the real one. That's the one that Michelangelo painted. I said, you mean to paint Jesus wrong too? And so they said, well, that's the one that the Pope Julius II approved. in 1909, and I mean in 1509, and that's the one we have adopted. So I went to the Chinese neighborhood to see if, since I know a lot of Chinese Christians, I knew that in Chinatown they have adopted the one for Michelangelo. Obviously, everybody did. So I went to Chinatown, and lo and behold, Jesus looked like Chinese. So I said, oh, it's strange. Michelangelo painted a Chinese Jesus? You know, and I was going around the world, and everywhere I found, when I found Jesus looked like the people in the congregation and the man in the pulpit. I came back in my neighborhood and said, by the time I get back, maybe he would be also like the people in my neighborhood. And up to today, I haven't found, the only people I found who have a Jesus look like them was my people. So I asked Dr. Clark the other day, I said, John, do you know where I could find a Jesus look like me? And he says, yes, back in the books. So that's the Jesus I want to discuss with you in terms of his role with an African people. His role as recorded in the scriptures with African people. His role as before the Nicene Conference and during the Nicene Conference and after the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 324. But also the landmass that he dealt with. When considering Jesus, if at any time Jesus went to Europe in person other than philosophically or theosophically, because you're going to say that Jesus has been all over the world and is of the world and the world is of Jesus. Sure, theosophically. But now I'm talking about physically in the flesh when he walked on earth. There is no record showing any appearance of Jesus any place in Europe. On the other hand, there are records showing 2 times Jesus in the presence of African people, and one specifically is after a few days of his birth, having had to run to Egypt because of Herod wanting to destroy him. And in the second incident, he is now 12 years old. He has challenged the intellectuals in the synagogue, and for whatever the reason, he again returns to Egypt until he is 30 years of age, and then when he is subsequently killed at age 33. This is the life of Jesus in a capsule form. Thus we see a Jesus with 2 experiences on 2 continents. One, the original of his birth on the continent of Asia, that is provided. You are going to accept the one that came out of the Nicene Conference, that version. Another, if you accept the pre-Nicene Conference version, he is born in Ethiopia in a cave. That is the Coptic, original Coptic version. But in either case, he's born in a land of, as expression go, of color. He is not of a European land at all. Nowhere in any of the literature, regardless of where you plan to have Jesus being born from a physical mother, Mary. So that must put us to a question, if he was born in Africa or Asia, among who are the people he most looked like, or the people he was like in his human life? And we must assume, by virtue of the evidence presented to us, he had to have looked like someone or anyone in this room. By virtue of the time span, and this is difficult for us because it is hard, we sometimes would prefer to say Jesus had no color. than to admit that he possibly could have been black. We heard from bronze to no color at all. And that the last no color at all we could eliminate, because if Jesus had no color, John the Baptist would have had a tough time baptizing him, because he would have been unable to find him. So we can't hide behind that word. We can hide if you said Jesus was chartreuse or rainbow like Jesse Jackson, or any kind of color, fantastic as it may be, but none at all. You got to give up on it, unless you're talking about the invisible man. And then Jesus would have to be wrapped in a lot of, more than swaddling band, he would have to be wrapped with a lot of gauze around his head for John the Baptist to have seen him. So we could better deal with Jesus the Christ as when Jesus the Christ appeared on earth as a human, a male. And that is the point where we find ourselves in a dilemma. We find ourselves in this dilemma because we have been unable to even look at ourselves in reality. When we look in the mirror, what reflects from the mirror isn't what we want to see at all. I mean, when we're dealing with ourselves, we're putting on Miss Jane Pearl, or what's the other, Brandy, Mary Kay, or anything like that. That's the sisters, of course. The brothers put on anything, including Lord. And regardless of what we look at ourselves, we don't see black folks coming back from the mirror. Somehow the mirror makes a transformation from the eyeballs back to the brain. The mirror do a double swing. And when the mirror does the double swing about us, ourselves, you could imagine what it does in the God concept that we have. Because even when we close our eyes to pray, and if you want something to be as black as it could possibly be, is with your eyes tightly shut, you shouldn't be able to see much more than what your mind tells you that you may be observing. And yet in there, we can't see Jesus as ourselves, or definitely his mother. Yet we are told by Josephus and others, all of them speak of a non-European Jesus. And I use the word non-European to ease your pain. Suppose I translate, Josephus saw a black Jesus in his writing. Here we can't see Jesus as ourselves, or definitely his mother. Yet we are told by Josephus and others, all of them speak of a non-European Jesus. And I use the word non-European to ease your pain. Suppose I translate, Josephus saw a black Jesus in his writing, as all the other men who came just shortly after Jesus. Let's take Saul of Tarsus when he was coming along the road, and this was after the departure of Jesus, of course. And Saul of Tarsus reported, after he had been confronted by the Christians there, that he had seen Jesus on the road when Saul was on the road. And what kind of a Jesus would he have seen? He could not possibly have seen a Jesus that was European, for he had no contact in our literature as a European. He had contact fighting Europeans or struggling against Europeans, the Roman army. At the time, being born of a Hebrew mother, let us go down then and backcheck the possibility of his Hebrewness being, quote unquote, his whiteness. It could not be, because being Hebrew has nothing to do with being of a race or of a color. You can't speak of a Christian race or Christian color, a Muslim race or Muslim color. Equally, you can't speak of a Hebrew race and a Hebrew color. So we could drop that. But let us look at one of the most important figures in Hebrewism or Judaism, either way you want to call it. And that figure would be more noted than the original Hebrew, Abraham. That figure is the one upon which Judaism is primarily based, because it is Moses that we are told who wrote the basic books of Judaism, the 5 books of the Bible, or the Torah, upon which Christianity is equally based. For Christianity adopted the Old Testament adjoined to the New Testament. And in one passage there in Exodus, it speaks in identifying Moses. Number one, he was trained in the ways of the Egyptians and became an Egyptian priest. That's telling his identity based upon where he got his learning. But then let's look at it from another perspective. The way in which he became in the royal family was that his mother supposed to have had him again at a period of time when there were people planning to kill Moses. Seems to have had the same background as Jesus as his youth is concerned. His mother carried him to the bulrush at the River Nile, of which we felt we had nothing to do with. Next week is going to start Rosh Hashanah. And very few of us here think that we got anything to do with Rosh Hashanah, even though we may get the day off. That's about the only thing we may feel we got to do. When the boss said, well, I'm not opening up this week, at least Thursday. Then you say, well, that's my role with Judaism. I got the day off. But you don't understand that Rosh Hashanah dealing with the Nile, dealing with your piece of real estate. That's before you got a piece of Harlem, of course. I mean, long before that. You would remember that point because I'm talking about Africa, and that's a dirty word. You don't want to hear that too often. I know you didn't want to hear it because you went colored, Negro, tan, peanut vendor. What had you other? Negro, and now Afro. Then now you're African American. Maybe next week you'll be just playing African, but you'll get there. I'm sticking with you because there's a lot of hope for you. You're gonna make it. So I'm sticking with you because I've been there with you one time. Now, it said that Moses was saved because the Pharaoh's daughter came down. She was going to take a bath in the Nile, of course. And she picked up this little baby boy where his mother had left him. Of course, nobody's realizing how is she going to take back this little boy and her daddy killing all the little boys who aren't Egyptians. Now, if her daddy didn't kill him when she brought him back to the house, obviously he looked like a little Egyptian kid, wouldn't you say? Remember, daddy's killing anything that isn't Egyptian, and he's a boy. And he doesn't kill this boy. And this boy brought back by his daughter, obviously. I mean, considering that this is a lax father, I mean, being me, my daughter came back with a little boy from the river. I was going to check, I'm going to call the king's physician and said, give this one a quick check here, brother. She bring back this little boy here and got it in my, how did this happen under my eyes? But leave that. Let's say there's a lax Pharaoh. I mean, the Pharaoh doesn't check too many things. And daughter got away with it. At least when the boy started to grow up, the Pharaoh is going to realize that this boy doesn't belong to this house. The only way the Pharaoh will know that the boy belongs to the house is he looks like the Pharaoh or people that look like the Pharaoh or like his daughter. And then the Pharaoh said, oh, she got this baby, but at least it's for one of our boys. But that didn't happen in the case of Moses. Let's take it one step further. As Moses grew up like his sister Miriam and like his brother Aaron, and we are told the convenient things that they had, the luxury, Moses is to get married. He's going to marry the daughter of who? Ruel. Ruel would be the high priest of Media, right where Israel is today. The connection there by the Sinai Peninsula, part of Africa, and Asia, where it was joined long before there was a Suez Canal. And Moses is supposed to say, two different occasions, he's supposed to identify himself. One, he challenges the Lord, that's Jehovah. And Jehovah is going to show him, well, man, I'm bad. You think you're bad, but I'm bad stuff. You know how God speaks. Before Shakespeare got hold of God, thee, thou, and thine. God speaks like all of us in Harlem, you know, hey, brother, come here. And, you know, and I mean, down in the Caribbean like me, something. But God said, look, I told you to do this and you refused. Now let me show you how bad I am. And so God did what? Say, put your hand in your bosom and I'll show you how bad I am. And lo and behold, Moses put his hand in his bosom and it had turned black. No, I missed it. It had turned white. No, if it was white and it turned white, then God wasn't bad. God was driving, right? It could turn anything but white. I know, like you say, I can't say it because I ain't got the right clothes on. I'll say, well, would the church say amen? But the Presbyterians don't do too much of that, and Anglicans and all that don't do too much of that. So I just say, let the church be quiet. Because God going to show it again. We're talking about black people because God going to take the same family. We done it with this black man. He's going to do it with his sister. Miriam going to give God some lick. Because Moses decided to marry one of his home girls. You know what's happening these days. We get that all the time. Most of our baseball players, football players, basketball players got problem marrying one of the home girls. But now Moses is going to be different than most of the brothers that made it, right? Moses is going to turn home to marry one of the home girls, a Harlem-born, Harlem-spun little girl. And Miriam wanted to go down the street in the Italian neighborhood, in the French neighborhood to get him a little girl. And Moses said, no man, I'm going to get me the sweetest thing there is, a soul girl. And Miriam said, I don't like it. The Lord called Miriam and said, Lord, come. Miriam, come here. Who put you in charge? And Miriam says, well, nobody put me in charge, but I don't like it. And the Lord said, who give you the right to like anything that I'm doing? And the Lord said, I'm going to show you how powerful. The Lord was showing people how powerful he was messing with his people. The Lord turned her white as with leprosy. No, I didn't write this. No. If something is wrong with the story, then don't blame me. Blame the inspired men of God. Yeah, I'm just copying what they said. I'm repeating what they said. Brother Brownlee, Dr. Brownlee, you've been looking at it too. Don't look at me like that because I know you read the same thing. I got Dr. Clark here. I guess two Dr. brothers, they should be able to know if I'm misquoting the brothers of yonder years. But nobody said that I am. So then obviously these two sisters are brothers, two brothers, Aaron and Moses, and his sister, and their sister, Miriam, all fall in line with looking like the Egyptians. Now let us go to Herodotus to see if someone else outside of theology equally saw the same thing the theologians saw. Herodotus, the first Greek historian, and once we even believe was the first historian, period. Herodotus said in 450, even much later than the time of Moses, which is supposed to be around 1460, before the common era or before Christ. Moses supposedly lived just about when Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, died, and Tutankhamun, his adopted son, took over the throne. That would be around the 18th dynasty. Herodotus said what? The records show, and by his eye, what he see. He is there now in 450 BC. And 450 BC, he's there around the time when the Persians are ruling Egypt. Egypt is now under siege, ruled by the Persians. You call the people Iranians today. And yet with the Iranian armies in there. And before the Iranian army, another army had come, another Asian army, the Syrian army. Assyria had been in there. They came there and pushed the Ethiopians out of Egypt. And even before the Assyrians, there was another group of invaders had come in there. They are called the Hyksos. All three of these groups from Asia, the Hyksos would come there in the 13th dynasty. In spite of the fact that you had these three foreign armies, and you know what happened when armies hit the land? The women are raped. And in spite of this period of time of foreign armies coming into Egypt, raping the women and doing other things, the dominance of the population was still African. Herodotus said, the Egyptians, the Colchians, the Ethiopians, and Nubians, and this is not exclusive, have thick lips, broad nose, woolly hair, and burnt of skin. That doesn't mean that all black people got thick lips, woolly hair. Some got and broad lips and so forth. Some people got the difference of that without even admixture with Europeans. But nevertheless, Herodotus gives us the stereotypical African that we are always talking about. And that was in 457 when he came. He left in 450. You know, we're talking before the Christian era, therefore the time reverses. And Herodotus gives us the same description of the people of Egypt. So since the Bible, whether it is the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, or the Muslim Bible, they all back up the same presentation of these biblical characters. Therefore, was it not the experience of the Hebrews in Greeks? Because you must remember, when the Hebrew books were written, they weren't even written in Hebrew, the Hebrew language, no Aramaic. They were written instead in Greek, in the Greek language. And even the Greeks were quite specific about that place called Egypt and Ethiopia along the Nile, because we go back again to the Greeks. Homer, the first Greek writer, is to say in the book called the Odyssey, he says that even the gods Zeus and Apollo, adopted by Greece, came from Ethiopia. Now, it's possible that they could have been speaking about Ethiopia as we know the land today, as we know south of Sudan. More than likely, however, he may have been speaking about the entire northern part of Africa, because in those days, Ethiopia was the name the Greeks called the entire continent as much as they knew. They did not know anything below. But we must say that Herodotus was speaking of the Ethiopia we know today, because he said, having gone south and past Egypt, in the land of Nubia, he attempted to go up further at the headwaters of the Nile, meaning if he went up at the headwaters of the Blue Nile, he'd be smacked into Ethiopia. So obviously, he knew what he meant. It would be the Ethiopia as we know it today, rather than the whole continent. So when Herodotus made his statement then, a statement that had been validated by others, and before the common era, like Eusebius and others who made the chronological list for the soul. When Herodotus made his statement then, a statement that had been validated by others, and before the common era, like Eusebius and others who made the chronological list for the so-called Greek philosophers, along with men who were much later. Again, I go back to Josephus, one of the earliest of the Christian writers. They are all to identify as such. Let us take another more recent example as a means of validating what I have stated. We have been reading all through the church history about Christianity and everything pertaining to Christianity. We have listened to this and saw young brothers and sisters being baptized or christened or whatever name you say, with the name of Monica, with the name of Augustine, the name of Tertullian, the name of Cyprian. We have also heard young brothers and sisters given names like Nymphano, Felicita, and all that. We sat there and don't consider at any time that when they get reason to christen this little child or baptize it or whatever process you want to call it, that it is a black child that we were reading about. When we read of Augustine, the bishop of Hippomagnus, the man who gave us our most modern concept in the Christian church, our Christian dogma dealing with moral laws for women to follow, and of course men. We're talking about Augustine. And yet, how many of us understand that we are talking about an African man looking like any brother in here who was setting down the laws of Christianity? You know of St. Augustine, Monica's son, Patrick's son, North African who was a member of the Mantian religion before he converted to what was then called the New Religion. And when we talk about Perpetua, Nymphano, and others, we're talking about the first people, women, to die in the name of Jesus. 3 North African women. Tertullian, the first social writer of the common church, the Christian church, didn't become bishop because the Pope didn't at the time like the writings of Tertullian because he was writing of the same people that Jesus identified with. The Pope at that time wanted him to write about higher class Christians, but he dedicated himself to the writing of the people, the masses of the people at the time. Quite different to Augustine, of course. Augustine had become, and from background and everything like that, much more sophisticated in spite of the fact that his young life was with prostitutes and whatnot. Oh yes, Augustine had a son named Abuqueta with a prostitute who supported him for 12 years. He overcome that when he converted and went to Rome. Now, with this kind of background, a background that even gave us, Africans, a foothold into the Roman Church, out of which the Protestant movement came with Martin Luther, of course, the Edict of Worms. This background we don't even get in Sunday school. We may get the name of Augustine or the name of Tertullian or something like that, Perpetua and Nymphano, but no identification to let us know that these were African. So the pictures in the book, in the picture book, made in whatever the publishing company is, continue to be an image which was not, in fact, the truth. Put me in mind of George Washington and Sam Francis. They were talking about the Constitution the other day and caught me up in a little discussion in a college, and I said I wasn't interested in the Constitution, didn't mean anything to me. Of course, it made a lot of people unhappy, including some black brothers and sisters in the law school. They were willing to hang me. So when I told them if Betsy Ross could have a lot of nonsense written about her for putting a few pieces of rag together and call it a flag, How come Phoebe Francis don't have the same thing said about her in the Congressional Hall? At least she saved George Washington from being poisoned by his bodyguard, Thomas Hickey. And one of the colored law students got up and said to me, "Show me where you see that." I said, I don't have the book here, but maybe you have a copy of Rogers' book. That was the nearest thing to that. Oh, a copy of the Congressional record that show where Phoebe Francis was given a little citation for having saved George Washington from being poisoned. No, Phoebe made a mistake. No, don't. I'm not bragging about it, because Phoebe should let the guy get me poisoned. I mean, after all, he was a slaveholder. If you were against the Pharaoh for the thing the Pharaoh had done, which would be the same thing that honest George had done, you would say, "Phoebe, go on, man. Don't tell it. Let them get poisoned." Law of retribution. But even there, we could not find it. So, well, as we look around then, in the last place we'd expect to find exclusion of the African personality. Yet when we were the foundation, I'm not even speaking to get our rich deserve, as Professor George James said in his book Stolen Legacy. I'm not even claiming the origin of the concept of theology or religion. That come later. We could give a whole lecture on that. Because then I will have to go with the concept of God before Abraham was born. Long before that. But I'm speaking about even today in the Roman Church, the Anglican Church, the American Church, and even synagogue and mosque, we are excluded. In the mosque we are excluded the role of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. We don't even hear about ourselves, in spite of the fact that Muhammad's grandmother, maternal grandmother, was an Ethiopian, and he speaks of it. In spite of the fact that it was an Ethiopian that taught Muhammad Haksat Kubad ibn Rabad, which they call Bilal. So we can't, even if we escape the exclusion in Christianity and we go to Islam, we find there's an exclusion there. We find an exclusion in Judaism. Why? Why there's an exclusion of the people who started it all? Because they said, well, Moses will learn in the ways of the Egyptians. He became an Egyptian priest. Remember now, there wasn't no Israel yet when Moses was supposed to be in Egypt. There was no Israel when Moses died. There was no Israel when Moses' sister Miriam died, when his brother Aaron died. That's going to come long after, with the tumbling of the walls according to Jericho. It's going to come then. Yet the Africans are performing. Where do these concepts come from? Those of you who have been to Egypt. The concept of the sanctity of birth. Spiritual birth even in consideration. The concept of the admonitions. The 42 that is stated, out of which the concept of the creation of the commandments comes. So we're not going to deal with that, because that is long before, predated Abraham by hundreds, thousands of years. But the most recent ones, the ones that we live with today, looking at how things are practiced, we are still looking in our respective religious institutions. We are still being happy when one of us have been made a bishop or a canon or something else, or moved to another level. We are still happy when the Mormons give us a chance now that since Jesus came back the other day and spoke with the Mormon headquarters, we can now preach. Of course, we got a little room.